Afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon.
Hey, Len.
Afternoon. How you doing?
I'm doing well.
Excellent.
My first Zoom meeting from our new space, our new home.
Nice. Whereabouts?
Still in Litchfield. We moved from the Green down to Litchfield Land Trust, refurbished an old railroad depot, and it's a really neat space.
That
So
sounds like it.
yeah, it's great to be in with other nonprofits too. It was kind of lonely in our old space. Still trying to figure out. We're still not completely settled in. I don't know where anything is.
That's half the fun of it, isn't
I know, right? Like makes life really exciting. Then
it?
again, I don't know where anything is in my house, and I've lived there for 15 years. So,
I have two little kids. That happens to me all the time now.
oh yeah, but you can find all the Legos on the floor though.
I find them all the time. Oh yeah, that's consistent.
And once they get to be adults, there's still a lot of shoes all over the place. They're just a lot bigger. And say
uh,
goodbye to all your teaspoons once they become teenagers.
I thought that was just in my house. I cannot keep spoons in the drawer. It's amazing.
Yep. And I'm disappointed that when I bought new flatware recently over the past couple of years, that I didn't find one where I could just replace one kind, like the teaspoons. I'd have to buy a whole new set in order to have teaspoons again.
well, thank you everyone for getting on here. I think I'm trying to see. I believe we have everybody, if I'm not mistaken.
Not Lo
Laura's coming on now. And then after
oh,
that,
that's
we
right. I'm
should be all
sorry.
set.
Yep. Oh, here she is. Okay. Excellent. Thank you for keeping me on point, Sam.
That's what I'm here for.
All right. Well, I guess I'll get started here. It's been a little bit of time since we've last met. The holidays and then my own issue that came up that I could not get the meeting last week scheduled, unfortunately. So we have even less time to get through some of these things. But just to start off, remarks by the chair. I sent around to, I believe, everyone in the on the task force itself in a drafting capacity, I guess, of a letter for a potential extension that we were talking about requesting. I actually had a conversation with, oh, I'm sorry, Steve Zaretti's joining. I totally forgot Steve was even on here because I haven't seen him in a while. Before I even continue, congratulations, Steve, new father again, I think for the second time, right?
No, first time.
Oh, first time. Oh,
Yeah.
congratulations.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, sorry to miss the exciting conversation, but we had important things to attend to for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as I was saying, Steve, I'm sorry I started without you, but we actually I sent around a draft letter, and I might have missed you on that email, Steve, to request an extension of the deadline, which is coming February 1st. And I think everybody here, I think we've all agreed that a little bit more time would be useful and would enable us to actually produce a report to the legislature that would be much more beneficial for them as opposed to what we can probably provide at this point. Um, I had a good conversation with Mariana yesterday, and I believe her legislative liaison for the Green Bank pointed out the JF deadline or the deadline for the committee to take action this year is, I believe, March 26th. So the draft I had sent around had included an April 1st request. It may absolutely make sense for us to change that request to something ahead of the JF deadline, which would give us a little bit less time in an extension, but I do think would be enough for us to come up with something here. So happy to open this up for discussion here in terms of that letter in particular. If anybody has any other thoughts or concerns with regard to the letter itself. I will point out too, I addressed it to the speaker and to the Senate President pro tempore simply because I believe, as Sam has pointed out, I think that's the process we have to take, as opposed to the chairs of the Energy Committee. We have to send it to the leadership.
I like the letter. You did a good job. Very good. And I especially like the fact that you mentioned that we really want to try to get something in this legislative session. So I'm all for the letter.
Thank you, Duncan. With regard to the date, obviously open for discussion. I had thrown out April 1st, but after talking to Mariana, I think it might make sense for us, and I'll just put it out there for discussion purposes, possibly March 20th. I'm not sure if that would work for the folks here. I think obviously I'd like to hear from the legislature or the legislative leadership themselves as well. I did reach out to Representative Steinberg, the chair of the Energy Committee from the House, and I haven't heard back from him yet. But if there's a separate date that might actually work better for them, of course, all ears. But perhaps March 20th might be something we could revise. And
Yep,
get it
that makes sense.
in
I think we need
time.
it as late as possible,
That's
but
what I'm
as
trying to
early
do.
as they need it before
Okay.
they need it. Laura,
Does
I don't
anybody
know
have
if
any
you're intent to be
concerns?
talking, but you're on mute.
But your letter says till April 1st, right?
Yeah, that was my initial draft, but after having spoken with Mariana yesterday afternoon, she had pointed out that the JF deadline is March 26th. So if we can get something into them before the committee's deadline itself, it would probably be more beneficial to them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So I can revise that draft and send it around. Looks like, oh, I'm sorry, Eric, I didn't see your hand there.
Yeah, sure. Well, just one maybe technical point, but since they can't grant an extension without legislative action, another way to approach the letter, rather than requesting the change, is to be more of a notification that we expect to be late with this report, but we'll be endeavoring to have something together by whichever date we agree to here, and that asking if they have any objections to our doing this, rather than doing what essentially would require them to pass legislation to do that extension. So I think that might be a easier path, and I'm assuming that since there have been some discussions with the chairs, or at least a chair, about where we are in the process, I wouldn't imagine there would be those objections. But and that was kind of one of the ways that we would approach it from the deep standpoint anyway.
Well, that's helpful, Eric. I think maybe the best path forward is to ask, straight out before we send an official formal letter, one way or another, which, to be clear, I'd like to get done in the next couple days, just because we are getting close. So, Sam, I'm going to kind of ask or lean on you a little bit in trying to find out what the preference is from leadership. And perhaps, I don't know who's handling it from the Speaker's house or Speaker's office, or from the Senate President's office, or if frankly it's better for us to just go right to the chairs of the Energy Committee and just ask them what their preference is. Eric's approach certainly seems viable. The letter I drafted yesterday or the other day seems viable too. So maybe we just ask what their preference is.
Sure thing. I can
Okay,
do that.
I appreciate that. And in terms of a date, does March 20th work for this group in terms of just a request? We may get a different date from them or a no-go on it anyway, but I don't see any objections to that. I do see, John, you do have your hand up here.
Yeah, I think, relative to the question on how much time we need, I wonder if it's not worth a brief exercise and just thinking about kind of a roadmap from where we are now to what, to the deliverable. And that could be, I was thinking about this a little bit, is that it might make sense for us to consider, an outline for this report. And then potentially we can kind of divide and conquer. People can write sections and ultimately come together and kind of get a group edit done on it. But I think about that just again relative to whether it's March 20th or April 1st or whatever it might be, just how much time we think is reasonable to develop the work product.
That's fair, and I do think that it does make sense for us to try to outline exactly how we want this to look. I will say I'm not quite sure we're there yet in terms of what needs to be included, except for I think we've discussed Duncan's proposals quite a bit. We haven't talked about some of the other concepts and whatnot that people wanted to bring up as of yet, but I do think it does make sense for us to try to outline what exactly the report will look like, and then fill in the blanks as you will, which I think is kind of what I was thinking as well, John, in terms of how to approach some of these issues and put together a product that actually includes everybody's perspectives on the various issues. Go ahead, Eric.
Can I just further suggest, I appreciate that excellent suggestion. John was thinking along the same lines of, if we have to, look at that end date and maybe work our way backward and figure out what guidelines we need to have along the way to make sure we're hitting a new time frame. But and so I would definitely recommend that by our next meeting, we have at least a draft outline to go through and put it against a timeline and really keep ourselves on the straight and narrow so we continue to make progress.
I think that's reasonable, Eric. And frankly, I'd be happy if the task force so chooses, I'd be happy to take the pen up for that initially, or obviously if anybody else wants to do it, I'm happy to step back as well. Let me know.
Len, I'd be happy to work with you on that if it's helpful.
Thank you, John.
Sure.
And as you said, we started reviewing what Duncan sent. We haven't reviewed whatsoever what I sent along. Or
no, you have not. In fact, I'd like to cover that today, Laura, if that's okay with you.
Well, with Alicia on the phone, it is okay with me. So you'll have to jump in and help a lot with that. But yes.
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right. Well, then, without any other volunteers, I'll take the pen in terms of trying to get an outline put together, send it around. It's going to be very rough, obviously, given where we are, but nevertheless, I think it makes sense to put that together and try to get it out ahead of next week's meeting. And we can also kind of wait to hear what Sam hears back from leadership and from the chairs in terms of what they prefer, in addition to my outreach to Representative Steinberg. So with that, I'll close that portion of the meeting. Move on to public comment. I don't know if anybody has public comment. Go ahead, Alicia.
I do. I just wanted to emphasize, in light of what happened 2 days ago in Fitchville, Duncan had asked at the last meeting what were the biggest concerns with just blanket incentivizing small hydropower. And what happened at Fitchville really kind of emphasizes this. There is a concern that dams that probably should be removed, taken out, that are in bad shape, may be put into hydropower production, with lack of a better phrase. And, looking down 20, 30 years, what happens if that's no longer profitable and someone just walks away and you have another situation like Fitchville where DEP has had to step in and put taxpayer money into even evaluating the safety of that dam. And now taxpayer money is going into making sure that, loss of life and property isn't going to happen downstream. And that is the big concern of, if we incentivize this now, 30 years down the road, what's going to happen when these dams are falling apart and nobody wants to pay for them? And you have dam owners that are not in compliance with DEP safety regulations, or even in cooperation with DEP in bringing these dams into compliance. So I just wanted to, I know we talked about it last, but I just wanted to take this opportunity to emphasize that this is exactly the kind of thing that we don't want to see happen down the road with some of these smaller dams that could support hydro, but really should they? And what's going to happen when they're no longer profitable anymore? So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Alicia. Any other public comment?
No.
Well, you're not public, but go ahead, Duncan.
Right. No, very, very good points. I mean, we saw some problems with two dams in the Norwich area over the last couple of days. And what happens when a hydro project gets incentives and then down the road it abandons the site? Well, then the dam is no longer under FERC jurisdiction. The dam then falls under a DEP jurisdiction. It's a private owner, and a lot of times there's problems with private owner affording any repairs, and then the DEP steps in and spends tax money. Personally, I think that it's better to have a dam under a FERC license, and then it project has its own revenue, and it's under FERC regulations to maintain that dam to certain specifications, and it has revenue to make the corrections and maintenance on the dam that it needs. To address the question, what happens down the road? Well, it's happening right now. We've got, 8 projects that have been recently, hydro projects recently decommissioned because they can't run under the current rates. So it's happening now. So these developers are going to maybe leave the sites and revert back to public ownership. Maybe the public owner cannot afford to maintain that dam. And then DEP has to step in and spend taxpayer money to maintain it. You're maybe thinking, well, an answer is to remove the dam, but that's easier said than done, I'm sure, in some cases where it's not easy to remove the dam because of landowner uses or it's expensive. So, that's my take on all that.
Yeah, I understand, Duncan, but there are some very good examples of even current hydropower projects where the dam was in poor shape, and it's taken, I mean, I'm going to name Kinneytown as a very good example.
That's exactly.
How much money has Save the Sound put into really trying to come around with the owner and come up with some sort of solution on Kinneytown? It's probably a lot of money, as well as the Council of Governments. So just because it's FERC regulated, and it does not mean that there will be a good outcome for that project, and that there won't have to be that nonprofits and taxpayer money won't have to be invested to making sure that there is a good outcome for that project and that water body. So it's not a given. It's not a given either way, Duncan. I agree. It's not. What we don't want to see is more Kinneytowns and more Fitchvilles.
And I certainly can't speak for Kinneytown. I don't know them. They're not a member of CSPPA. I don't know what's going on there. I do know that there's been problems. That's about all I know. And I hope it doesn't smear the relationship we have regarding other hydro projects. Right. They're probably not getting much for their power. That's the problem. Maybe they're just getting the 3 cents per kilowatt hour.
That's not the problem. That's not the problem. There's a lot more problems than that on Kinneytown. I will say, as someone very actively involved in Kinneytown, first of all, I have seen some very poor dam inspections come out of FERC. Very poor. I have definitely seen more comprehensive dam inspections come out of our state dam inspectors than what I've been reviewing for Kinneytown, that is for sure. For example, on Kinneytown, it's actually 2 dams. It's the Copon Dam and the Kinney Pond Dam. On the Copon Dam, they didn't even realize there was 3,000 foot of earthen dam that needed to be inspected for the last few decades. So they hadn't been inspecting it. Completely covered with trees. I was the one who went out and found that it had already overtopped, that we were having an ongoing breaching effort, and that we had a railroad, an active railroad right below that dam. So there are definitely examples of FERC dams that don't get the attention they need. There are plenty of good examples, Duncan, of ones that do. the ones that are making money and doing a good job. But with Kinneytown, it's a mismanagement on a much larger scale than that. It's surely not just a rate issue. They stopped generating over 10 years ago at Co and left it in disrepair without any efforts at all to keep it up. Kinneytown itself had not been operating when we were in negotiations with them to look towards removal as well. I mean, this is definitely a plant you would be embarrassed. I mean, this is a plant you go and look at and do the inspections and look at their facilities, and they were just not doing anything.
So
Well,
just to jump in quickly before we go on, I'm gonna close public comment.
Yeah.
I have a feeling, frankly, after having read through some of your proposals and your thoughts, Laura, that this is kind of getting into something of some of the issues that you were raising there as well. So just to be official, I'll close public comment and move on to discussion of proposals for legislative consideration. I'll just jump right to you, Laura, if you're okay with that, and
Sure.
start from there.
Yeah. So I am not a policy person at all, and I apologize for that. I am an engineer, and that is my background, and that's my understanding of these things. I understand a dam inspection a lot more than I understand all the policy or the funding side of things. But luckily, there are a group of very supportive people that I have to get some help from when coming up with these. And on this one, we looked towards Eve Vogel at UMass, who'd written up a policy piece for Massachusetts. Alicia Charmant helped totally jump in and make this more Connecticut specific. We also got input from Andy Fisk and Mark. I don't know how to pronounce Mark's last name at Outdoors. Do you know, Alicia? Zakutskini?
I'd have to look at it. I'm Polish. I'm sure I can pronounce it, but I don't know.
Someone's recording this, and Mark is going to look at me later like, really? That was like the worst effort at trying to pronounce my name as possible. So, again, this comes from work that's been done over multiple years, and then Alicia's efforts to help try to turn this a little bit more Connecticut focus. But so I would love for Alicia to help run through this with me, because it's not something that I have the expertise on as much as she does. Can you give us a little more background, Alicia, on what it is, and maybe see if you can give kind of a thumbnail of what was trying to be done?
Sure.
With the team?
Hold on. I don't have two screens here, and I accidentally closed it down earlier. Let me get back to where that is. My apologies.
Is there a way we
I
can
have it if
also?
you'd like me to share it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, Laura. If I'm kind of operating blind, if there's something that we're going to.
Yeah, I think she's about to do a screen share, but but I also have the ability to do screen share if we need to.
I'll be quiet then. Thanks.
Do you want me to share my screen?
Yes,
Can
please.
I?
And if you can't, I can.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Sam, for the power.
You're welcome.
Okay. So, again, this is something Eve Vogel up at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst had come up with this with some other folks. Eve does a lot of work on the nexus between energy and water, specifically rivers and surface waters. So, looking at the overall guidelines, when we're looking at hydropower in general and river health, is to look for those win-wins, and only incentivize projects that really do enhance natural flows, that do not undermine biodiversity. We're heading into a biodiversity crisis. We don't want to make that worse. And also provides passage for native and migratory fish, and does not degrade water quality, and also helps to provide better access and for rivers and enhances river resources. We don't want to see harmful hydropower incentivized, and we just talked a little bit about that during the public comments. and it's really important that, you know, we're looking at projects that are going to, if we're going to subsidize, we're going to subsidize the right projects. And also, you know, we also don't want to create subsidies that are going to prop up dams that where the cost just doesn't make sense. There was a study that came out recently in April of 2023 that looked at the cost of rehabilitating dams across the US. And those costs have skyrocketed. And it may be something that, and I'll send the resource over to the group, and we can include it in any resources in the report. But obviously, like I said, we don't want to end up with situations where we're incentivized something, somebody takes control of a dam or decides to rehabilitate a dam that really just needs to come down because it's in such bad shape, just to find ourselves in a situation later where, again, taxpayers have to take over to either take down the dam or fix it. And of course, you know, the definitive stance is we're not building any new dams for hydropower in Connecticut. We already have 4,000 and we don't need any more.
Just a
and
quick question
sure,
on
go
that,
ahead,
on number 4 there.
Sure.
I understand the aversion of building new dams for sure, but why include turbines? If you're changing out an old turbine, for example, and putting in a new state-of-the-art turbine in an existing flow situation, what would be in many cases, that's actually more environmentally beneficial than what's existing there. What would be the aversion to that?
I'm going to let the engineer take this question.
You know, again, this came from another document, so I'm not quite sure where that particular part of it comes from. But I tend to agree with you there. I mean, again, what I would rather see is cost-effective hydro facilities become more cost-effective. Larger hydro facilities get more efficient turbines on them, and keep the impacts to a smaller region, but make sure we're getting as much energy as possible out of those locations. So I'll have to check on that. I'll have to check on what kind of reference that comes from, but I agree. I agree that while we're not building new dams, maybe someone put that in there for the idea of kinetic turbines, but I'm not sure why they would, because kinetic turbines don't need a dam. So you can put them on a system without that. So I will ask on that one.
I think also this might also be that confusion, right, between new projects and updating facilities type of confusion. It sounds to me, Len, like you're referring to an existing structure.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, a new dam.
I don't think that's what this is referring to.
You know what? I bet that's what it is. Okay, not being able to talk to Eve right this second. That's probably what it is. It means putting new turbines on existing dams, as opposed to. But still, I think I agree. We ought to discuss that. While avoid building new dams makes sense, I think we have been talking about retrofit stuff, and we've surely are talking about improving high quality hydroelectric facilities. So
yeah, there are very few existing dams that are, frankly, that would make sense from an economic standpoint to add a new turbine onto an existing dam that doesn't have hydro. There might be one or two, and in most of those cases, the dam probably wouldn't be easily taken out simply because they have other uses, such as, you know, recreation or something else that's water supply, whatever it is. Flood control.
And Duncan has that on some of his. He has some on some of his lists, but I would have argued that some of those made a lot more sense for removal than retrofitting with the turbine. But I agree. If we are going to move forward with that, first of all, I'll check with Eve on that, make sure I'm not missing anything. But I would agree with the edit on that.
Thank you, Laura.
Mariana, a question.
Yes, I have a question, and thank you for this. I guess my question and what I want to understand a little better is if state and federal requirements address some of the harmful impacts that you're talking about here, about natural flows, biodiversity, providing passage, if that is not already covered under state and federal requirements?
Not
It-
consistently.
Yeah, not consistently and
No.
not enforced. Not enforced and not consistent. I mean, there's tons of dams out there that don't have proper fish passage. There are dams that are being actively managed by either the state or FEMA that have issues with water quality or flow release or fish passage. So yeah, no.
I guess
So I skipped Mariana down to where I have some data here on
Mhm.
dams in both Connecticut and New England. And I want to note that 32% of hydropower projects in Connecticut are exempt. They're exempt from having a FERC. It's kind of a FERC permit, but it's an exemption. And what that means is that that's not going to expire. And so normally, if you have an issue with a dam that is maybe supposedly run of river or isn't run of river, and its FERC license is expiring, that gives people an opportunity to step in and say, we want run of river to be a requirement on this dam now that it's getting a new FERC license, right? Which, by the way, is not an easy, not necessarily an easy thing. It's not like you ask for it and they give it. But with the exemptions, there is no opportunity to fix any problems on that dam because that license isn't going to be renewed. And you don't have that opportunity to step in as a stakeholder and fix that problem. And furthermore, if you look at operational modes, and unfortunately I didn't parse this out between FERC regulated and non-FERC regulated, but looking at just run of river, only 58% of hydropower projects are run of river in Connecticut. And in New England, it's only 43%. So it's not an absolute given that these environmental issues are going to be addressed through the federal and state processes.
Yeah, it's really not. It's really not. That's of course what we do. That's what we're working on. So every single project we're working on has significant problems with this.
Just out of curiosity, the data behind those, was that based on number of plants, or was that based on installed capacity or megawatt hours produced? I only ask because I know, for example, the vast majority of hydropower in Connecticut is not run of river. It's from an installed capacity perspective. It's our biggest plants are pond and release, traditional conventional hydro.
I'd have to go back, and I got all of my data from the Oak Ridge Laboratory. And Len, we can go through and look at that because you're looking at it in a different way I would. So I think it might be a good idea to sort of go back and look at it and make it more correct to your perspective. I'm a policy person. So.
It may not have much weight on our conversation. I look at it and it kind of surprised me to see those numbers being the way they are.
Okay.
Because
do you
obviously
think there's less run of river?
The conventional hydros, I believe, at least ours and the vast majority of the installed capacity of hydro in Connecticut is under FERC license and has been and will continue to be actively engaged within the FERC license and the stakeholder processes that are in place. So
you're referring to the FERC, no, not the operational mode, the FERC licensing, correct?
I was looking at the operational up
oh, okay.
A little further up there, but no, it may not have any bearing on this conversation. I'm just curious where it came from. I'm sorry, man. Did you still have more?
Yes. Just one point I want to make on the FERC exemption, by no means being an expert here, but I have seen from at least one project that we're involved with that even though it has an exemption, there are dam safety requirements from FERC around that. Understood that it doesn't expire, but there are dam safety requirements associated with that. And so I guess where I struggle a bit is what's lacking state and federal requirements to bring these like dams into compliance? Or is it hydropower? That's the issue.
I think you are, I think you may be conflating that a little bit, right? So you have dams that have hydropower and dams that don't, right? And
Right.
so, and what we saw with Fishville is a good example of, you know, while the regulations are working in that, you know, really the dam safety program is all about inspections and making sure that these dams are stable enough. So when you have a class C hazard, which is what Fishville was, which means that if that dam goes, it's going to take out, you know, property, life. I mean, it's the highest level of hazard in Connecticut's regulations. But it doesn't address things like flow, right? There's no, on those dams that don't have hydropower, they're really, unless DEP steps in, and maybe Eric is about to give 2 cents on this, I see his hand is up. That really isn't addressed in the dam safety program. We do have stream flow regulations in Connecticut, and those are, I believe, only downstream of certain dams. So that isn't even consistent enough to really have very consistent protections for aquatic life. Is that?
Can I just jump in for a second? These are great conversations, but I'm wondering if we shouldn't just kind of at least kind of quickly go through the document just so we have a chance to, because then we would all have a chance to comment kind of individually on things. It might take, we might only, again, like we did before, get through a fraction of this and then have that. I mean, I want to have every single one of these conversations so that we understand our different perspectives. Because I've been involved in groups like this, and defining the terms and defining our perspectives is what helps get us all on the same page.
I think that's fair, Laura. I will point out we do have an extended period of time than past meetings. We did schedule 2 hours, so hopefully everybody can stay for the full 2.
Well,
But
I surely don't want to cut off.
I'm actually absolutely okay with you going through the whole thing. I will ask though, Eric and John, are you okay with taking your hands down for a few minutes, or did you want to?
If it's going to provide any clarity for what we just had the conversation, maybe we should just close that out really quick, and then,
because I don't want to cut it off.
Looks like Eric
Eric's still got his hand up. I think he's going to provide some clarity.
Well, I don't know if it'll provide some clarity, but maybe we'll save us a little bit of time, because you know, I think we all know that time is precious, and this is a really helpful piece that you shared, and obviously good discussion. But because there seemed to be a mix as you're going through the policy implications of proposals, that, you know, some are, here's why things shouldn't change, and others, here's some things that might potentially change if done in a certain way. I think it would be really most helpful, because I think that I mean, it's good to just touch on why things shouldn't change, but I would encourage you to be relatively brief on that, and go to, if there are areas where you do see opportunity for change, that would be really helpful as we're starting to think about recommendations that might go into a report. So just I think that would be helpful to know. Let's not spend so much time talking about status quo, and let's talk about if there are things that need to be changed or fixed. Let's go there.
Sure. And that this actually the current class 1 and 2 is a good one here, Eric, because there was an attempt to change this last legislative session. And the reason why, Mariana, is because there are a lot of legislators who really thought, well, all of these things are already taken care of through the FERC or state process. So why do we need to have this in our classifications for procuring hydropower? And this is something we absolutely need to keep in place to make sure that we have protections for our rivers. And let's see. We also believe that class 1 and 2 should not be extended to pump storage hydropower. that there should be mechanisms provided to thoroughly scrutinize how hydropower incentives may impact river ecology, consumer pricing, and the cost to the communities and taxpayers. And any policies that incentivize should consider river ecology, use, the communities. We need to look at this more holistically, essentially. And also, really, we want to provide these incentives where they're needed. We need, and we believe in this report and what we're telling the legislature, we need to provide proof that anything we're incentivizing is actually going to help us meet our clean energy goals. And with also the thought of, is that power going to be there? Are we going to be able to generate that power when we need it? And I'm thinking specifically about the summer, right? If we were in drought, I mean, this summer would have been great, right? We could have had a whole lot of power from the water we had coming through. But in those summers where we have a really hot, dry summer and the rivers are very low, are we going to be able to actually generate that power from some of these small systems? Is it going to actually help us meet our peaking goals? And some of these have a lot to do with the rate structures that, Mariana, Len, you guys are probably a lot more familiar with than I am. But when we look at these incentives that, if we're going to be looking at anything that is incentivized by rate and taxpayers, it needs to be done very carefully. And also that, so when I showed you that pie chart earlier, about 10% of the dams that are producing hydropower are non-jurisdictional, meaning they are not FERC regulated. And we have to make sure that if any non-jurisdictional facilities are going to be utilized, they have to have be subject to state requirements for fish passage and water quality. However, I will say, well, I'll just leave it at that. And then the remainder explains our reasoning behind, or hopefully will provide an understanding as to why a FERC license doesn't automatically mean that all of the environmental mitigation measures are there. So, and again, I'm happy to parse this data out a little bit more and make sure that I'm looking at it properly. And also an understanding that, hydropower regulation does not necessarily, the regulation isn't consistent across the board when something is FERC regulated. And that goes back to this FERC exemption and the fact that we do have non-jurisdictional dams. So I'm going to leave it at that. And then we can go into discussions and questions.
Okay, that was even shorter than I thought. So good time to have the questions now.
I like being brief.
Thank you, Laura and Alicia, for running through this. I'm actually going to take one quick second just to ask one clarification point on the final point that you made, Alicia, with regard to the FERC license is not always ensuring effective environmental mitigation. Are you proposing that any kind of proposal that we put out as a group include a requirement that participating resources are subject to further environmental mitigation beyond what FERC licenses are requiring? I will say, for example, we have a number of environmental mitigation requirements along our Housatonic River properties, up and down the Housatonic River in Western Connecticut. It's pretty substantial. I'm sure it's probably not everything that everybody in the stakeholder process back 15 years ago when they did it wanted. But if we were to have one facility, for example, on that system that were to participate in any program that the state offers in the future based off of this task force, are you saying that you would want that facility to be required to environmental mitigation above and beyond what's already been agreed to?
I would expect that we would that the status quo would be there, right? So right now we require run of river, and there is a requirement that it meet water quality standards for the state. So it's important, and that's for larger hydropower, and I believe it's for small hydropower as well. But it's important that we maintain that. But I think, and what we're talking about here is that this proposal came out of a desire to support small hydro. And so what we're looking at here is making sure that going forward, any incentives that go toward making sure that small hydropower is profitable. And I don't think a lot of your dams even fit into that space, do they?
We do have some
hydro.
smaller run of river facilities along the Housatonic. But they, as I said, they are subject to substantial environmental mitigation already. What I was trying to figure out is if, for example, I'll just bring up our Falls Village facility, which is a run of river, and I think it's about 7 megawatts, give or take 1 or 2 off the top of my head. But if something like that were to qualify for some kind of program in the future, would you expect that facility to be subject to additional environmental mitigation that perhaps wasn't included in the initial licensing process? Which
Well, does it
think
have safe, timely, and effective fish passage? Is the water quality in the impoundment safe to be released and safe for people using the reservoir? Are the flow releases such that it's not negatively impacting the downstream river?
Well, so those are all questions that are certainly asked during a relicensing process. I just using the Falls Village example for this particular exercise, I would say yes, and we're in full compliance with all of those things that we need to be in compliance with. That may not always be something that other stakeholders agree to, and I guess my question just really revolves around would this require additional stakeholder processes in order to take a facility that may already be in compliance with its license, but may not be up to the same level that some of the stakeholder organizations think it should be. It's a very subjective question.
Yeah, no, that section was included, Len, to not necessarily that there was a desire to put additional requirements, but just to illustrate that just because something is FERC regulated does not always mean that it meets the standards that we had, the guidelines that are important to the environmental community for river health.
Mm-hmm.
Not necessarily that we're proposing anything new or different, just that, and I'm going to get back to Mariana's question, right? So those folks who don't work on a daily basis on river ecology and understand dam relicensing and all that, there is that feeling that everything's there already. Why do we need it in other places? And our point being that it is there in some places, but it's not consistent across the board. It's not a given that just because something is FERC regulated, and if there is an issue, Len, an issue with your dam, when you come up for relicensing, somebody's going to jump in and tell you about it, right?
Of course.
And there is the opportunity for that because you have a traditional FERC license, not an exemption. If you had an exemption and there was a problem, it would be much more difficult for an organization like Save the Sound or Rivers Alliance to step in and say, we think you are, causing water quality issues, and we want you to change your operations. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I don't think, I can tell you on the discussions on this document, there was no discussion of an additional process by which we would be looking at something outside of a license renewal. It was more to say, well, if this is the stuff that's required by the state or the FERC, if you're FERC licensed, are you doing that stuff? Okay,
Gotcha.
Then,
That's helpful. I appreciate the clarification. I apologize, Steve, for jumping ahead of you there. But please jump in.
No, all good. And thank you, Laura and Alicia, for the presentation and the work that went into this. Not a question, but just, I guess, a comment in response to the point around hydro's role in serving summer peak demand, let's say. And if we think about system needs going forward, New England in particular is expected to shift more toward a winter peaking system as we think about electrification of heating systems and whatnot. So I just want to raise the point that the production profiles and value of hydro under a past system may not be illustrative of what we think about it moving forward, and we shouldn't be totally short-sighted in the value that these resources that can provide the system. So just a point on that specific comment.
Yeah, and there are.
I think I'd like to see. I would like to see that data, and I'm not questioning you, Steve. It's not anything I've heard of before, and I'd like to see it.
Yeah, there's studies from ISO New England in particular for grid planning, and a lot of that is informed by state policy making. So yeah, we can probably share that with the group.
Great, thanks.
Go ahead, John.
Thanks, Len, and thanks, Alicia and Laura. I agree with Steve. This is helpful, and I appreciate the work put into pulling this together. I think my question is, pretty high level, just in terms of the intent here. I guess I'll just interpret it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is providing some guardrails for if we're going to do something to support in-state hydro. Some of the criteria we'll call the river community feels is important that is considered in order to qualify. Is that fair?
Yeah, I do think that's a very fair way of describing this. Okay,
great. That's helpful. And I think we all agree that some guardrails make sense. I think one thing for us to really consider carefully is whether those criteria need to be met prior to qualifying for support or a program, or whether the program could help projects meet those criteria. So I think it's a question of, are we rewarding what's already there, or are we trying to transform and improve the existing fleet to meet these criteria? And I think maybe it's a little bit of both. But if we have, say, a particular plant that we have concerns about water quality releases, and under their current commercial terms, they can't put a deep gate in, or whatever the solution is operationally. But if there was some sort of program that provided them the financial wherewithal to be able to do that, then there's a win-win, right? It's to your first point in the papers, like, let's find ways that improve ecological performance and financial performance, so that we're all coming out of this with an overall better situation. So I think I would invite us to consider whether these are criteria that need to be met to qualify, or whether they could be used to help determine qualification if as a program could support that work.
My one concern.
That's why the Green Bank is here, John.
Yeah, well, I think that's right, Alicia. I mean, there's certainly an opportunity to include that type of collaboration.
My one concern, John, is if it's a if it's a, hey, you can get in and then you can do this versus, hey, you can't get in until you do this. You can't get in until you do this encourages people to get it done. You got in and then you should make these changes and make these improvements. They're like, oh, I'm already in. I'm already getting the, I'm already getting the benefits. I'm already getting the higher rate or whatever. And, why do something that might be costly now?
Well, I think you would have to have some, you'd have to have some performance, metrics.
Time limits and
I mean,
I can understand that.
It's a chicken or egg, and there's probably some people who are way smarter than me who could figure out, how to do that. I do know, as from an owner's perspective, it's hard to kind of take that risk on if there's not some level of certainty. Right?
Yeah, no, well, especially a financing point of view, yes.
Yeah, right. So I mean, and there's lots of ways that problem can be solved. So I would just kind of throw that out there, and then a couple of other things, just really quickly. To that kind of FERC exemption thing that's come up, I want to just clarify that a FERC exemption is only exempts projects from Part 1 of the Federal Power Act, which is the licensing process. Exempt projects are still subject to things like Part 12, which are related to dam safety. So there are still even an exempt project has continuing FERC jurisdiction under certain elements of its performance.
And they can lose their exemption. And they can lose their exemption too. That being said, there are a lot of exempt projects that are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. And they haven't been kicked off the exemption list, and they are not maintaining safe, timely, and effective passage. They're not keeping their structures up per se.
I think the reality is dams are they're expensive and significant infrastructure, and a project that has generating capabilities is infrastructure, dam infrastructure that has at least some potential to generate revenue to put into its proper maintenance and operation. There are the vast majority of dams in the country, and including Connecticut, are not generating revenue, but they still have those obligations. So a lot of the things we're concerned about, I think, apply even beyond hydropower projects. So one way to consider looking at this is these are some there are some inherent problems with dams from a pure ecological perspective. A hydropower owner who's willing to be cooperative and kind of work in partnership could be part of a solution to mitigating some of those, right? And without them, then we do have this kind of public burden problem that I think we see more frequently in non-hydropower projects than we do, quite frankly, in hydropower projects. Last point, appreciate the emphasis on run-of-river operations, but I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between that and the desire to have operational flexibility. And we need to be careful there that there's consistency. Okay? You can't have them both.
Well, run-of-river is already in the class 1 definition for procurement.
Right.
And the last meeting, I discussed the lack of definition of run-of-river too, because we've been hearing people use run-of-river, but they're doing it like on a 24-hour period, and they're actually peaking and calling it that. From an ecological point of view, run-of-the-river is actually run-of-the-river. There's no 24-hour period with peaking in between, because you are affecting how the species are responding in the system with that.
Understood. As I say, I understand the idea of instantaneous run-of-river and the emphasis on that. But I think there is a little bit of certainly a trade-off in having that and having operational flexibility to meet kind of peak demand, because that's just a reality.
Yeah,
and I don't have a solution for that. I just want us to be eyes wide open on that.
They're competing things. There's no question.
Right. And I think we got to be careful about saying we want both those in a position paper and creating guardrails, because ultimately what that results in is nothing qualifies.
In terms of, I'm sorry, John, were you?
I'm done. Yeah,
Okay,
sorry.
yeah, he had said that was the last one. So just to kind of go back to the dam safety issue, one thing I do want to kind of raise with the group here, I think the thousands of dams that we have that are unpowered that are issues. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, I think Fitchburg was unpowered.
Was.
Yeah, that was not a hydro dam, but it's an example of a really big problem we have across the country, really. But Connecticut's definitely, we have, I think somebody might have mentioned earlier, I think over 4,000 dams in the state of Connecticut. Most of them are on, the vast majority are unpowered, privately owned, nobody's taking care of them. And that's a huge issue. But I do want to keep us within the bounds of what the task force was created for. And as much as I do think we should mention unpowered dams and I mean, I know our company and we're very much in favor of trying to help find solutions to take out dams that don't need to be there, and to make safe all of those dams that are not being made safe. But I want to make sure we kind of stick to the main points, being powered dams or potentially powered dams in the future, just because it's
Well, the reason I brought that up is
limited.
because Fitchville was on the list of potentially powered dams that was provided to the task force
Was it? I didn't.
and to the
It
legislature.
was. Fitchville
Yeah.
was on that list.
I did not notice that. Well, but that's helpful to know. I wanted to remind everybody just to ensure that we don't end up with basically biting off more than we should be trying to chew.
So one of the things I think that might be helpful in the report is to have a couple of case studies. And I think Colebrook Dam would be a really good case study to bring forward. So Colebrook Dam, MDC ended up removing all of their hydropower equipment and surrendering the FERC license because well, there are other reasons, but they also weren't making money on that dam. And I think it might be a good idea to take a good look at that and use that as an example of how would an incentive have worked on Colebrook to ensure that it was still operational. Because look, that's a dam that's not going anywhere. It's an Army Corps flood control dam. You know, what are the issues in making sure that operations on these dams where I think we can all agree we should be producing power, what are the specific issues and how can we fix those and incentivize that kind of hydropower? I think it might be helpful to use especially with legislators. They can connect with that kind of stuff. So
That's a good idea, Alicia. I will say I don't have much information on that particular facility as to why it went out of business. Is that information available?
I can connect with the MDC and get some of that data.
I do think that would be useful, and I do think it kind of connects to potentially another case study, and perhaps Duncan, if he's I don't see him here, but
He's
assuming
up there. He's here.
perhaps we could take a look at a facility such as some of those that he's representing with his organization, as an additional case study as to some of the struggles that they're looking at. That I think is a very nice idea. And in terms of the guardrails,
Duncan has his
hand raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah,
the old-fashioned way. Sorry, it was the old-fashioned way. He was using the actual hand.
That would be why. Go ahead, Duncan.
That old school work sometimes.
Yeah, the one you don't have to find a button. You don't have to find a button. It's just connected to your body.
That's it. You got it. Right. Well, very good report. CSPPA really appreciates the detail in your report that you gave on the various impacts of hydro. Believe me, we are all for having clean, healthy projects out there, and we want to do anything we can to do away with dams or developers that are not good stewards of our beautiful rivers in Connecticut. I'd like to keep on track here on what our goals are and what we need to do on our time framing course. I know that we were talking at the end of the last meeting with Mariana's evaluation of what can we do to the wording of class 1 to maybe get it appropriate for what we're looking for. And to me, what we're looking for is to help the projects that are under 3.5 megawatts. So I don't know exactly where we left off with that with Mariana. but I know that we're redlining the wording on class one. So we can maybe take a look at that quick here, maybe next thing. But right now, I out of your report, what I hear is that the current wording on class one is good. Is that what I'm hearing? The wording on Connecticut class one, you believe is good wording, and you're good with it?
But I don't think we agreed to go with that document. So therefore, I don't think we're just wordsmithing a single document.
No. I'm asking the current
Yeah.
wording.
Duncan, yes, we would like to see the guardrails for class one maintained.
Right, the current wording as it exists for Connecticut class one, you're good with it. Right? So we are to accept, we don't, with the problem that we have, of course, is that it says began operation after July 1st, 2003. Right? Because a lot of our projects began operation before July 1st, 2003, and they're sitting here running, getting only 3 cents and trying to relicense and so on, and they're having a really hard time. So, you know, I guess
I think we all agreed the last meeting that that was arbitrary. Nobody knows where it came from. So I think one of the fixes that, we can look at throwing around is getting rid of that date for sure.
Yeah, okay, good. I'm good to hear that. So maybe if we can do it now or a little bit later, maybe with Mariana, get back on that, the definition of class one to incorporate the less than 3.5 megawatts, I would pose that we take a word for this would be in addition to what's already there. Maybe with what's already there, adjust that 60 megawatts to something smaller if possible, because that's 60. I don't really get that. Maybe we'd have to talk to Len about your projects, because I know that you have Stevenson at 28.9 megawatts. You got Rocky River at 29 and Sheepog at 42.6. Do you utilize class ones at those projects? If do you have a concern?
They're not run of river, so no, those are pond and release conventional hydro. They don't qualify.
All right. So we can really lower this figure down without getting anybody upset here, maybe to something lower than 60. And then just keep that wording, lower it from 60 and add the wording that says a project less than 3.5 megawatts located in Connecticut, and then complies with all the wording that you have in class one right there on environmental restrictions. So that's something that I'd like us to look at.
Yeah, Duncan, my recollection from last meeting is that we agreed to reduce that back to 30 megawatts, as nobody knew where the 60 megawatts came from. Remove the date and clarify that it would be for in-state resources only. And go ahead.
I'm sorry. It's just also that I think we had agreed to do a little bit of additional research to find out where that 60 may have come from, and also what the implication might be of reducing it. I mean, I'm maybe a little more comfortable talking about the 2003 date than I am some of those, upper and lower limits. So, and obviously, I can't speak full-throatedly on behalf of what DEEP can support without going through, that process that we've talked about before of getting that review. But yeah, I want to make sure we understand if we're going to drop that 60 meg number, we know what the implications are.
I will point out that I think it was the last meeting, Alicia mentioned the 60 never had any public notice, no time for discussion or anything else, whereas the 30 had. So the 30 was something that had gone through a review process and the 60 had not. It literally was put in there.
I emailed you, Alicia, and you indicated that was a last minute thing, that all of a sudden they slipped in and went to 60. It seems like something a little bit funny going on behind the scenes there, maybe, huh? But let's check it out and let's see what our state is looking for on that. We have to meet our RPS. Has this got to do with Hydro-Quebec maybe? And there's people that, have agreed to have that come in. Maybe there's even contracts for all I know. I don't know. But, I'd like us to talk about the wording on class one to try to get the under 3.5 megawatts in there, like I was talking earlier.
If you want to make a change to ensure it's not something out of state or anything else, I mean, I think the as Mariana pointed out, I think we talked about making the requirement in-state hydro. That's a possibility. I don't know. Obviously, I don't speak for everybody in the hydro industry, and I'm not sure who else is leveraging Connecticut Class 1s for hydro outside of the state. So, I don't want to speak for all of the companies, but it may be detrimental to somebody. I'm not sure. But the
Right.
vintage, I do recall us having a pretty deep conversation about that and agreeing that it was kind of arbitrary.
Right. So back, and tell me if I'm out of place here and where I'm going here, but Mariana, we were working on your nicely done document. We were redlining that, and then we didn't come to a conclusion on that, right? That the meeting ended and it's still hanging out there on where we are with your document. You with us, Mariana?
Yes, I am. Yes, we haven't gotten to a conclusion. We kind of sped through the last of it, but I'm guessing that when we look at that outline, we can incorporate some of what we discussed, including the changes into that. And I agree with you, Duncan. It's helpful to know that it seems like we have some consensus that the guardrails already in the Class 1 definition seem appropriate for the group here.
So can we pull up your document and I'll come to an agreement on how we would like Class 1 worded? Get her done.
Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Len. I guess one point on the 60 megawatts, I'm personally not even aware of a run-of-river project in the region that would be that large. So I don't know where the number came from, although it could be that there's a facility or facilities that meet that threshold. There's none in our portfolio. I did have a question, though. I guess I missed the last couple meetings, and so not fully up to speed as we're talking about changing the definition. Duncan, you mentioned the 3.5 megawatt threshold and kind of limiting that to in-state. That sounds like it makes sense based on the context of the task force and what we're being asked to do. Is the thinking then to further change the Class 1 to limit that from regional facilities to participate? I was confused on that piece.
I wasn't proposing that, but it's up for grabs. But no, I was just talking about leaving the wording exactly as it is, but just adding wording to include under 3.5 megawatts in Connecticut and not having the stipulation after July 1st, 2003 requirement. That's the thing that is preventing us from getting in.
Yeah, no, and no issues with that. It was a clarifying question. I'm not proposing that we make additional changes here.
Right.
I'm trying to think about how this would fit. I was just looking back at the statutes that apply to this. And the 2003 is something that would have to change within the current Class 1 definition. But I think, so are we talking specifically about looking at incentivizing through pricing, or are we talking about the inclusion in the recs? Because they're different, right? So if you want small hydropower to be included in the recs, wait, I might be retracting that statement now that I'm actually verbalizing it. Because it seems to me that if you're looking at some sort of price incentive, first of all, I was going to say, does it have to be statutory? And I think it probably should if we want to have guardrails around it. But I'm not sure that these definitions need to be included in the Class 1 section of the statutes, unless, well, it sounds like if you're removing the 2003 and we have those other guardrails, then, that is obviously an issue, but there could be another standing section that addresses any incentives for in-state small hydropower and the guidelines for inclusion in any sort of pricing incentive, right? Does that make sense?
Would
Because
think
I'm
they'd be
not
separate.
sure that if what you're trying to do is come up with an incentive and it needs to be in that class 1 definition and I mean
Right.
yeah.
Okay, so
I'm gonna stop
like I
there
said,
because now I'm confusing myself.
it's okay. I love to watch game, but as I said before, a generator produces 3 products, all right? Capacity, energy, and RECs. And right here today, right now, we're just talking about the RECs. We'll talk about energy. I still want to address that and giving hydro better rates for their energy, like solar and wind get like 15 cents or whatever they get, because we're only getting 3. So I want to talk about that number in a separate thing here after we finish up with a RECs. I like to think of
Then I
them as-
don't think we need to put anything as far as the 3.5 megawatt definition, right? Because right now it sounds like the only thing stopping the smaller facilities from getting the RECs is that date, right?
Right.
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 And so we
I-
don't have to mess with any of the other definitions except for coming back down to 30 because that needs to happen anyway. But so that is kind of a separate conversation as far as the 3.5 megawatts, because if we can get rid of that date, then the smaller facilities right now that don't qualify will qualify if we get rid of that 2003 date that no one knows where it came. Correct.
Right. I just think you'd be bringing in maybe too many projects if all you do is remove that date. Because you'd be bringing in all the out-of-state projects, a lot of projects coming in. So that's why I wanted to limit it to Connecticut and remove that date only for small. Because if you just remove the date, I think you're going to be bringing in a lot of projects and maybe providing a glut situation with Connecticut Class 1 RECs.
So,
But-
So I
so
guess,
I don't
can
think we're
jump in here?
disagreeing then, right? Switch it, get rid of the date, add the Connecticut and change it back from 60 to 30. It sounds like we're all on the same page with that. Alicia,
But we
you're,
also want to
it
make
sounds-
sure we're not excluding projects that are being included now that are actually generating power and meeting clean energy goals
oh,
that
okay.
already
Yeah.
apply. So
Yeah, that's
we don't want to create that situation either.
why I was saying a whole new paragraph
It's
without
yeah.
the date, but everything else included, and add the word Connecticut only. So it still has all your guardrails, doesn't have a date, and it has Connecticut only, and it has less than 3.5 megawatts.
So
I think I
just
understand where you're
one,
coming
Less
from.
than
Go ahead,
3.5.
just
I don't get it.
one quick thing on this. I am aware, even though I'm not a lawyer, that there are some potential potential Commerce Clause issues with trying to limit to Connecticut a certain class of dam in this situation or hydro facility in this situation. So that's something that may need some additional legal work to explore. But and of course, as I've said now several times, I can't say that we are supportive of that until we go through a process internally. But yeah, let's put it out there and see what we may be able to support.
Yeah, and Eric, that's a good point. I think that Commerce Clause is dormant and it's not really been tested in any way, and so we see these sort of carve outs elsewhere not being, kind of disallowed. I do have to jump here in a moment, which I apologize for, but I would just note that I support Duncan's approach to sort of keep everything as is, add this new paragraph specific to these smaller in-state resources. If there's a need to adjust from 60 to 30, the other piece, no pushback from me on that side. So.
I guess I don't understand it. If you're less than 3.5, you're also less than 30. So so that's what I don't get.
I think
let me
you'd basically be, if you remove that date, then you're allowing all of these other existing projects that don't currently avail themselves of the program to participate. So you're kind of doing probably something that's not totally in line with your intent. If you're approaching this with keeping everything as is and having this now separate parameter like Duncan's providing, then you're making clear that this is the only expansion of the program.
Because we don't want to crash the value of Rex either.
So it seems like what we're proposing here and is that we leave the language, and this is where I'm a little bit confused, and I want to get folks' thoughts here. We leave the language as it is, but add that in addition, projects that are less than 3.5 megawatts and in state that came online or that don't have a date requirement with coming online are also eligible for Class 1 RECs.
Include all of that guardrail language.
So that would be a separate, so
Yeah. Just
let's say
repeat the guardrail.
a project that came in after 2003 and is greater than 3.5 megawatts and is outside of the state is also eligible currently. And it seems what's being proposed here is that it would continue to be eligible, but another project that's less than 3.5 megawatts without any sort of indication of when it came online would also be eligible. Is that what's being proposed here? Or is what's being proposed here changing the current language so that the date is removed, the size reduces to 30 instead of 60 megawatts, and there is language added about in-state location requirements?
Well, that's what we're debating.
But
it's
I
the
guess those
first
are the
one.
debates, right? Yeah.
It's my
I just want to
understanding is the
understand.
first one. That would be my interpretation as well, which I think, Duncan, is what you just said too. Yeah.
And the reason for, so my mind was in the second, and the reason for, and I just want to understand the reason for not changing those requirements for everything is because we think it would lead to a flood of new projects that would
No.
crash the value of RECs.
There are a number of projects in other states that would avail themselves of the program if the vintage was removed.
But
And
if
it would
there was
potentially
an
be-
in-state, if there was an in-state requirement, that wouldn't be an issue, right?
No, but you can't if you just add the in-state requirement and not only and not apply it only to 3.5 megawatt or under capacity facilities, it would potentially impact other facilities out there. It would cut them out of the program that they may already be participating in.
Got it. So unless they already participate in the program. I mean, right. I guess what we're trying to solve for here is if there's a project that's already receiving a benefit.
There's a number of in-state projects that frankly don't qualify because of the vintage. So we're trying to find a way essentially to help them without crashing the market.
Right. But I guess if we had an in-state requirement and deleted the date and reduced it to 30 megawatts, what's the concern there?
That
Because
the removal of the vintage, the removal of the date would invite an influx of other resources out of the state that would suddenly avail themselves of the program and potentially crash the REC.
I understand that, but if there were an in-state requirement, that wouldn't be an issue.
We would be kicking
I think
people
the
out.
opposite happens there, Mariana, is that we have probably a fairly significant volume of out-of-state Connecticut 1 RECs that are coming in under the existing definition. That if you were to change the definition, you kind of cut them out of the market.
Kick them out.
Yeah, so I think what we're talking about is sort of a two-part Connecticut Class 1 qualification standard. And this is very similar to what they have in New Hampshire for their Class 4 standard, where they have a carve-out for in-state projects that have criteria and a carve-out for out-of-state projects that have separate criteria. But they're, regardless of which criteria you meet, you're still eligible for that New Hampshire Class 4 REC. And I think what we're saying is sort of leave the language alone as it is for the existing Connecticut 1, 30 megawatts, 2003, and let's create another subcategory there for in-state that has all the criteria we've been talking about.
You send that
Except the
message around,
existing one
John?
has 60, not 30. The existing one has 60, not 30. So it's
I
actually
know, yeah.
modifying what's there because or getting it from the 60 back to 30, but then leaving it, and then creating a duplicate one that is just for 3.5 and under, that doesn't have, that has a state requirement, but does not have the date requirement.
Exactly. You got
And
it.
I
Can you
can,
send,
and I
John,
can,
can you
and-
send I'm sorry, can you send New Hampshire's language around when you get a chance?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if it's helpful, now I get it. So thank you for walking
Yeah,
me
me
through
too.
that. And apologies for being slow here. And I'm happy to draft that, Len, for review.
That sounds great. Um,
And just going back, Eric, to something you said about the in-state potential with like commerce. I know we have in-state incentives such as the NRES program. So not sure if we're able to do in-state incentives. Not sure why we wouldn't be able to do it here, especially if it's limited. But I know as much as you.
Right, and there are
You probably know
in-state
more. You probably know more, Mariana, honestly, but I'm just hearing from some folks on our team that might be an issue of concern and something that, we'll have to look at as we look at any proposal.
But like you said, John, New Hampshire class 3 is it has a restriction for New Hampshire only, and that's working right now.
Class 4. I'm trying to figure out how to drop the link in here, but I am not figuring it out. So
No,
I guess
we won't hold it against you.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
New Hampshire has
class.
New Hampshire has a New Hampshire only wording in their class 3, right?
well, the good
Class
news,
4 existing small hydroelectric. Yep.
we could certainly point that out in any kind of report with the recommendation. And the nice thing is, I know the legislature does have a team of lawyers that they can work through this problem themselves.
Sure.
Obviously, I don't want to give them a proposal that isn't viable, but at the same time, we don't have the same level of resources that they do. So,
John, I think the chat is turned off because this is being broadcast on YouTube.
I think that's correct.
So, yeah.
Got it. Thanks, Alicia. I don't feel completely incompetent now.
No worries. Okay. What else do we have in this? Well, actually, with Laura's document or with Mariana's document, I don't know if anybody else has other bits they want to go through.
To move along towards our goal of sending a report that studies existing hydro assets in the state and reviews the benefits of such assets, we have to start writing a report at some point, right? And I'm not saying that study I did is the best thing in the world, but I think it could be a starting point. So a wild idea is each of us take my study and redline the heck out of it according to the way you would like it to be worded. And we all send them to our friend Len, and then Len puts them all together and comes up with a draft. And we all look at that and say, okay, is this doable or not? The last section in that study is a summary that gives a recommendation to provide good rates for hydro in Connecticut. So that's what we're talking about now, this class 1 and so on. So that part is our recommendation that hopefully we do on providing equitable
Wait, are we
rates.
talking about rates or recs? Because if you're talking about rates,
Very
that
good.
doesn't have anything to do with class 1. It's rec.
Very good. You're right on the ball. No, what I hope that we propose both. Please do this to Connecticut that class 1 definition for the little hydros, and please provide these rates for hydro similar to other states. So, but that's for us yet to determine. Anyway, what I'm talking about here is we all take my study and redline it all that you want to, put in your paper and so on, and put in a case study and take out these other things that you want to take out and then send it to Len, our chairman, and let him come up with a document that we'll call the draft to then work further on. It's a beginning of something. We got to start somewhere, and the clock is ticking. And it's fairly factual, my report. I realize it doesn't talk a lot about negative impacts of hydro, but I'd love to see that put in there to make everything across the board understood. So what do you think of that?
Go ahead, Eric. I think you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, well, to Duncan's question, what do you think of that? Well, I guess I am a big fan of information going into these studies that are not overly one-sided. And I think we've talked before about wanting to have a study that is balanced. But here's what I'm just going to suggest, Duncan, and maybe this helps to find some common ground here. I think, and by the way, I think the analysis in the study that was done was very well done. And I would say, there have also been proposals from the Green Bank and from, Save the Sound with Rivers Alliance. And I could see those as being appendices in a study or report that kind of represent different perspectives that are offered by individual members of this task force, but that the report itself, I think, is something that should be more neutrally written. It can certainly pull from various aspects, but I guess I wouldn't take the recommendation to start with your report and then redline it. I would say include the report as it is in the appendix. Let's pull from it and others as we put together the body of the report.
And that's why I had my hand up. Same thing. I would prefer not to start with one report and redline. I think there's a lot of good information in what Duncan wrote. I think there's a lot of good information in what I put together. Well, what the team that I was working with put together and what Mariana had to. So I'd recommend we get the extension. We agree on an outline of what we want to do. And we can pick sections from any one of these things to fill in that outline. But I would rather see that. I would rather us discuss what an outline should be and then fill it in. Because otherwise I feel like, and Duncan, it's not your fault, it's just we're dealing with different issues. But I would feel like I was on a critique mode and you were on a defense mode, and I don't want to do that. I want to be on a collaborative mode.
Yeah, understood. Very good.
Go ahead, Laura. I'm sorry, Alicia. I was looking at Laura when I said
That's
that.
all right. We're both blonde.
Exactly.
So Duncan, now was in your report, were the number of projects that don't qualify for RECs included in your report? Because I think that would be a good data point. I mean, existing hydropower projects that are producing that don't qualify for RECs because of that 2000 date. Did you have that? Because if not, that would be really good information, data, facts to have. And also, the list of potential projects, a few of us have gone through. I sent it to Harry Yamalis and Chuck Lee at Dam Safety, and they're going through that list so that we have an accurate list of dams that could potentially, because I think that's another important data point is, so how much are we looking at here, and will incentives actually help us meet our clean energy goals? And that's just important information to have in there. And I mean, dam safety is a little bit busy right now, but I'm hoping. I spoke with them before the holidays and just, asked that he has someone at Dam Safety take a look at it. Only because there are some dams that we can't identify on that list, and Dam Safety will be helpful to reconcile all of that, just so we have accurate data.
Yeah, that's great. And as you know, me and Chuck have been looking at that list. I emailed you today. I don't know if you saw my email today. So I am working on that as time permits. It's pretty good because I found a mistake in it because South Regional Connecticut Water owns a conduit site, the one you had your yellow highlight on. And I called them and talked to the guy, and it's running. It's a 300 kilowatt conduit. It's running. So it's got to be taken out of that list and put into the operating projects. Anyway, I will do that. Good idea to make a list of those that do not qualify versus those that do qualify. It's going to be a short list for those that do qualify. It's the newer ones. There's just a few of them, but I'll do that. That's a good idea.
Okay. So I think I have the pen in terms of an outline and whatnot for next week. And John, I am going to take you up on assistance. I do appreciate you offering. And anybody else who has any thoughts or anything like that, please feel free to send them over. But my plan is to essentially take my notes from the last several meetings, Duncan, Laura, and Mariana's recommendations and reports, and create a very draft, a drafty draft of the a skeleton of the outline and send it over for everybody's consideration.
I wonder what ChatGPT would come up with.
If I knew how to
Just
use
saying,
it, I would
just
try it, but
saying.
I don't know how to use it anyway.
Me neither, but just saying.
It comes up with some good stuff if you have a good outline.
Oh, that's
I don't know if I may have
that's
to
hysterical.
I don't know if
Outline, if
That's
you give them the,
hysterical. We're gonna AI the report. We'll just let the machine listen to all of our conversations, give it the outline and say, go for it.
recommendations. That's
ridiculous.
Yeah. So
I'm saying that
I'm not
because
sure.
we're being recorded. That's ridiculous. Of course, we're not going to do that.
Probably a good thing to put that in there. Yes.
Yes.
Agreed.
So I think we might have gone through the vast majority of this. I think we have our assignments in terms of what we're going to do over the next week. We do have public comment on item 5 on the agenda. I don't know if there's anything else anybody else wants to say in terms of public comment. If not, then I'll move on to item 6, which is the announcement of the time and date of next meeting. I was planning on next Friday. I hope that it still works for everyone collectively. I know Steve's not on, but I can reach out to him as well. And stay at 1 o'clock. One question I do have is, do we want to continue to go a little bit longer with a 2-hour time frame in terms of the outline and try to move forward, or do we want to make next week an hour?
I still think we need more time. I hate to say it, not that any of us have more time for meetings, but I think we need the concentrated time if we're going to get something done.
Yeah, I have a conflict at 2:30. Could we do an hour
Make
and
an
a
hour
half
and a
rather
half.
than 2?
That sounds good to me. I think that would work. Sam, can we just plan for that for next week?
Sounds good. Just to double check, I was sorry, I'm multitasking real quick. 1 o'clock is still the same time?
Yes, please.
Understood. Can do that.
Fantastic. Go ahead, Duncan.
Question, Mariana, you'll be sending out wording for class 1 that we talked about today. Is that what you indicated? Mariana?
Yes, correct. Sorry, I
Yeah.
was not.
Oh, okay, good, thank you. And then we're still working with just 7 members. We don't have the 8th member appointed yet. This is just a technical thing.
I have not heard.
I've been asking Senator Looney's assistant to please appoint number 8, but
I will say, Duncan, is probably confusing because we have also been asking. So I know you have a candidate in mind. I have, for transparency, have been trying to get Alicia on this task force as well. So
luckily, John and Alicia are still with us and still adding to the.
And that's kind of cool.
Maybe they
That's kind
can
of cool.
appoint half of each of us. We'll make a whole.
Yeah.
There we go. There we go. Okay, we got it.
I felt like I needed one more NGO on board. I wanted someone with more policy background than myself, but I have definitely been appreciating John's input and experience as well.
Yeah, it's all working good. I don't need to, but I try to dot too many I's maybe. All right.
No sweat. All right. Well, anything else for the good of the order? If not, have a great, in some cases, long weekend, and we'll see you next week.
All right. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ron. Thanks, everybody.
Bye,
Have a good